Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Orchardcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Appel, not Apple, coming to you from Treaty 6 territory in what you may know as Edmonton. The Gaza ceasefire is incredibly tenuous right now. Last week, US President Donald Trump revealed his plans to ethnically cleanse Gaza of its inhabitants to build some sort of seaside resort under US control, as he met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Over the weekend, Hamas released 3 Israeli captives. As agreed upon, these hostages were noticeably emaciated, leading Israeli government officials to compare the freed captives to Holocaust victims, as if Israeli hostages are the only people being starved in Gaza. On Monday, Hamas announced it was indefinitely delaying the release of the next 3 Israeli captives scheduled for Saturday, citing Israel's repeated violation of the ceasefire's terms. At this point in the ceasefire, the Israelis have allowed fewer severely ill or injured medical patients to leave Gaza for treatment, and fewer aid trucks and tents to enter than it agreed upon. They also haven't completely ceased firing, killing more than 100 Palestinians in Gaza since the ceasefire went into effect on January 19th. You don't have to, nor should you, take Hamas's word for it. The New York Times reported in passing yesterday that 3 Israeli officials and 2 mediators confirmed the accuracy of Hamas's claims. But Trump now says that unless Hamas releases all Israeli hostages in its captivity by Saturday, he will allow all hell to break out in the coastal enclave. And Netanyahu has ordered Israeli troops to prepare to invade Gaza again. Through all these political machinations and shifting goalposts, it's important not to lose sight of the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. Since October 2023, at least 90% of Gaza's population has been displaced. The price of basic goods has increased by 250% on average. Water and sanitation systems have been obliterated. Every hospital has been completely or partially destroyed, and the vast majority of the population in Gaza faces severe food insecurity. Joseph Hazboun is the regional director for the Catholic Near East Welfare Association in Jerusalem. He joins me momentarily to discuss the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and to what extent the ceasefire has mitigated it. Joseph, welcome to the Orchardcast.
Good evening, Jeremy, and thank you for having me.
And you are the regional director of the Catholic Near East Welfare Association in Jerusalem. Our conversation is, of course, going to focus on the situation in Gaza, but I can't help but ask, what are things like right now in Jerusalem?
The situation is a little bit tense because of what is happening in Gaza. And this has created a rupture in the relationship between the Israelis and the Palestinians, especially in view of the various policies and actions of the right-wing parties that have raised the tension and somewhat the unacceptance among the Jews of the Arabs and the Palestinians. So, it's very tense, and people tend to keep to their own areas and don't mix unless they have to.
And tell me a bit about yourself and what your organization does. How do you come to be its regional director for Jerusalem?
Kinewa, Catholic Nearest Welfare Association, is a Vatican agency that was established in 1926, mostly to support the Oriental Catholic churches in Eastern Europe. Now they are also active in areas in Africa and in India. And they also run the operations of the Pontifical Mission, which is another Vatican agency that was established in 1948 following the war between the Israelis and the Palestinians and the huge number of refugees. A good part of them was Christian. So this caught the attention of the Pope, and he established a special pontifical mission for Palestine at the time, which was originally established in Beirut and in Amman and Jerusalem. And the operations were handed, and in order to start this pontifical mission, the responsibility was given to the Archbishop of New York, who was and continues to be the chairman of Kinewa. So in the Middle East, the officers of Kinewa are called Pontifical Mission. And I started with the mission in 1994 as an administrative assistant. And then in the early years of the year 2000, and especially after the first local lay leader was elected, I started taking more responsibilities to support in the project administration. And then in 2009, there was an excellent administrator running the mission, but little experience with fundraising. So this also increased my responsibility as well as my experience in fundraising and meeting the donors and the delegations. And so by the time the last director decided to move on to another responsibility, I was ready to take over, and I think I was the best option, and I hope that I'm doing a good job at it.
I know there's a sizable minority of Christian Palestinians, but I'm wondering how many of them are Catholic?
Well, in the Holy Land, there are roughly around 200,000 Palestinian Christians, probably 180,000. The Melkite Church, the Greek Catholic Church, is the largest, counting around 80,000, with the strongest and largest presence in the Galilee. However, the Latin Church counts around 40,000 distributed between Palestine and Israel. So around 20,000 probably or less in the Palestinian territories, less actually, maybe around 15,000, and around 20,000 in Haifa, in the Galilee. The rest are Greek Orthodox, which is the second major party in Israel, the first major majority in Palestine, and then we have other congregations, denominations, Syrian Catholic, Syrian Orthodox, Armenians, Lutherans, Anglicans, and the like. So we form around maybe 1% of the total population. But to be honest, this does not reflect the true contributions and the true size of the Christian presence, which is to be measured through its various organizations and institutions and contributions to the society at large. In the Palestinian territories, the 1% is responsible for around 33% of the NGO sector services provided to the Palestinian population, serving around 2.5 million Palestinians on an annual basis. So these figures come from a study that we did in cooperation with the Dar el Kalima Lutheran University in Bethlehem around 3 years ago. So these are fresh numbers during COVID.
As my viewers and listeners will all know by this point, the humanitarian situation in Gaza has been dire over the past 16 months. 1 year into the war, so in October 2024, 86% of the population was facing crisis levels of hunger. What, in your view, has been the most significant impediment to feeding the population of Gaza?
I have to state that it was the and continues to be the Israeli policies. As at the level of the decision makers in the Israeli government, from day one, no, day three of the war, the Israelis announced that they will deprive the Gazans from food, water, electricity, gasoline, fuel, whatever is needed for the basic elements of making life possible in Gaza. So it was clear that they wanted to make life impossible, and they did that through their continuous bombing of infrastructure, schools, hospitals, mosques, and churches. So basically, during the 15-month attack on Gaza, they destroyed all the infrastructure, especially in northern Gaza, but not only. And so it's the Israelis who prevented the entry of aid cargoes going into Gaza. Before the war, around 1,000 trucks loaded with all kind of material and supplies used to enter Gaza. They stopped all that. And then when they controlled, the Israelis controlled the Rafah crossing, they call it the Philadelphia intersection or the Philadelphia crossing.
The Israeli Prime Minister's hometown.
Yes, entirely control the Rafah crossing into Egypt and from Egypt, and all supplies stopped because there are two entry points into Gaza for supplies. One in Rafah, which is in the south on the borders with Egypt. So from Egypt, trucks would come in, supplies and aid supplies. And the other entry point is the various checkpoints from Israel. In the north, there are two, and one in the south. So all of that stopped, and the idea was to starve the people and to force them to leave Gaza.
Yeah, and of course we're seeing the second part of that playing out currently with President Trump. But I wanted to ask because my understanding is that at a certain point the Israelis did start to let in aid trucks. It wasn't enough, and they faced other barriers once they were inside. But at what point did the Israelis lift the complete siege of Gaza that former defense minister Yoav Gallant famously announced on October 9th or 10th, and started letting in a small trickle of aid?
Well, under international pressure, they were forced to let in some supplies, but they made sure that the supplies are provided for the people in the south and maybe in middle Gaza, but the Gaza Strip, but nothing to the northern Gaza and Gaza City itself. And the numbers were never enough, were never even close to enough. Only a few trucks per day, just to make appear that they are helping and relieving the dire situation in Gaza as far as medical supplies, food, and water. In addition, number of trucks that were permitted in were not fully filled. So they were maybe half empty or half filled, and with material and supplies that the Gazans didn't really need. Unfortunately, the same is happening today. Basic life supporting supplies are not being permitted into Gaza, and they're letting in stuff that are not urgent or not needed. For example, the people need tents. You know that the level of destruction to homes and apartments and tower buildings is immeasurable. And so the people need tents to live in, and they need tarpaulins, if I say it correctly, which they use to create some sort of a rooftop on their over their heads and on the sides to protect the children from the cold. We are in the winter season. I don't know if it is a blessing or not, but for Gazans, it's a blessing that we are having a bad winter season. So we didn't have much rain until now. And so this is at least a relief for Gazans. Of course, it will be bad for the Palestinians during the summertime when we will have no water and the water cisterns will not have been filled. And there will be a water crisis in the summer for the Palestinians in the West Bank and probably for Israel itself. But at least for Gazans, it's a blessing. And they can a little bit cope with the situation. So, yeah, not enough supplies and not the right type of supplies.
And we've been talking a bit about the impact of the Israeli siege and the war on hunger in Gaza. But then there's a whole other range of public health impacts that the war has imposed on Gaza's population. The Israelis have imposed on Gaza's population. What has the public health toll been of the past 16 months?